Hello, welcome to the DEEPMED Seminar, a history forum for ocean science, strategy and environment. The DEEPMED Seminar is brought to you by European Research Council funded research project DEEPMED, which stands for Discovering the Deep Mediterranean Environment, a History of Science and Strategy, 1860 to 2024 maybe. Today, Marta Conde will be talking about her co-author paper Mining Questions of What and Who, Deepening Discussions of the Seabed for Future Policy and Governance, which appeared in 2022 in Maritime Studies. Maritime Studies is a journal devoted to policy, where it's not usual to see reflective pieces such as this one, or at least so reflective pieces. So we are welcoming Marta for her presentation of that paper to us, and she will be, of course, updating some of the features in that paper and making it more directly relevant to the European arena. Marta Conde is Marie Curie Fellow at the Institute for Environmental Science and Technology, ICTA, at Autonomous University of Barcelona, and at the University of Queensland, from which I think she recently returned after a long stay. Her research looks at social reactions to the expansion of extractive industries. Using political ecology, ecological economics, political economy, and environmental justice, she analyzes the drivers, strategies, and discourses of resistance movements to mining. So, let's go ahead and listen to Marta. Thank you.
So at the time when this paper was presented, deep sea mining was growing in interest, but now in the context of all the mineral needed for the energy transition, for all the renewable energy, there's a huge pressure to advance mining in the seabed. If you can move, if you can put the presentation. In the presentation, you will, I also explain how this paper is part of a cost action network that if you pass to the next slide, you can actually see the paper. And there you can see the other co-authors are Aletta Mondre, Kimberly Peters, and Philip Steinberg, with who we participated in this cost action network. Because I saw that, I'm also speaking to Lino, thanks so much for organizing all this also, because speaking to Lino and also seeing the other webinars organized, I realized that maybe not everybody was fully aware of what deep sea mining was or the governance of it, how it was going. So I'm going to do a bit of an introduction. If you pass to the next slide, in the 70s, there was growing interest in deep sea mining. So this push for the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which was negotiated between 1973 and 1982. This is called UNCLOS. So under UNCLOS, it designated the areas beyond the continental shelf as the area, which is in dark blue, and where mining activities are to be governed by the International Seabed Authority, which is based in Jamaica. And the area is to be managed as the common heritage of humankind. Then we will see what this means. States, and then we have the States Exclusive Economic Zones, the EEZs, and extended continental shelves. These are areas up to 100 nautical miles, where the coastal state has exclusive sovereign rights over the seabed resources. The area constitutes 54% of the global oceans, and these are regulated by the ISA. And to carry out deep sea mining activities, you have to apply for a license from the ISA, which to do this, you need a state sponsoring state and a company. You need to have this alliance. So what are we mining? If you pass to the next slide, we're mining especially 4 different types of minerals. We have the seafloor massive sulfides, which are around the hydrothermal vents along the oceanic ridges. We have the cobalt-rich ferromanganese crusts, which are located in the seamounts. And we have the ferromanganese nodules, which are located in the bottom of the ocean floor. If you go to the next slide, half of the commercial deposits are located of the seafloor massive sulfides and the ferromanganese crust are in the exclusive economic zone, so in national jurisdictions, while 80% of the nodules, the polymetallic nodules, are in the area. As you can see here, you can see the blue are the polymetallic nodules, and the seafloor massive sulfides are located along the tectonic plates where the hydrothermal vents are. And then you have the seamounts in yellow, that for the ferromanganese crust. At the moment, the ISA has given 31 exploration licenses to 22 contractors. And out of 15 out of these are in the Clarion-Clipperton fracture zone, if you go to the next slide. And there we have China. In the next slide, you can see it. But you have here this is a map of the ISA. You have most are in the Indian Ocean, off the coast of Japan, in the Clarion-Clipperton zone in the center of the ocean, and then in the North Atlantic. And also in the next slide, you can see that you have China, India, Japan, Russia, and South Korea have the exploration licenses here, while we also have countries in Europe like Germany, Belgium, and the UK sponsoring contracts, as well as Pacific states like Kiribati, Tonga, and the Cook Islands. If you go to the next slide, the several Pacific islands, as you can see, the several Pacific countries who are pursuing mining in the area as well as in their national jurisdictions. Because as you can see, they even though they're small islands, they have a lot of extension in the ocean. There is sets of. So the several Pacific states like the Cook Islands, Nauru, and New Zealand, who are pursuing mining there, because many of these countries were aided by the EU-funded project, an EU-funded project that helped them develop regulations in their own nations. Up to now, however, just to be clear, we're only talking about exploration of the deep sea. There hasn't been any exploitation at the moment at the commercial stage. I think it's important to talk at this stage about the possible impacts of deep sea mining. If you go to the next slide, the biggest concern are the mining plumes because they have high concentration of heavy metals. There's have been monitoring of these plumes, and they can travel up to hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. And depending on the currents, it can affect very different depths. There's the risk that could affect the entire food chain through bioaccumulation and biomagnification processes. And in particular, they could affect filter feeding organisms, suffocating them, impact on health and fishing productivity that could affect local and indigenous communities as well as commercial fleets. We're talking, when we talk about the seabed nodules, the one at the bottom, the nodules fields, here you're a lot of scientists of the ocean. So I don't know if you're aware, I was very surprised that these abyssal plains, there's no change happening on them. They've sent expeditions and they go back after many years and the same print of the wheels is there. So nothing moves there. So this will imply the destruction of these structures and ecosystems and functions of these habitats. And we're talking something like 9,000 square kilometers at the moment at the Clarion-Clipperton zone. Then we have the seamounts, where we have sponges and deep corals that can take thousands of years to grow, that could be destroyed. It's difficult to predict the impact on migratory species like fish, whales, or seabirds. The oceans, and this is a big one that I also find very disturbing. The oceans are a main carbon sink on the planet, and they capture a quarter of the CO2 emissions. So this could have two implications. One is the release of greenhouses, and the other one is that this could affect carbon-fixing organisms like phytoplankton, reducing their absorption capacity. All this is based on research by fellow researchers. There's a lot of interest in this at the moment. Then also, for example, in the Arctic, where Norway wants to do at the moment deep sea mining, this could release methane stored in subglacial ecosystems and Arctic permafrost soils. In the hydrothermal vents, to extract the massive sulfide deposits, isn't clear what it could cause, because these have an important role in regulated climate and ocean geochemistry, and it's believed it could disturb the amount of available nutrients and the entire food chain. Then all this mining is going to cause noise and light pollution that could especially affect whales and animals that depend on echolocation systems, and obviously affect species that we don't even know they exist at the moment. That could, for example, prevent the creation of medicines. For example, I was just reading while I was preparing this presentation that the text for the diagnosis of COVID-19 was developed using an enzyme isolated from a microbe found in deep sea hydrothermal vents. And this is very important in contrast with the advancement of the BBNJ agreement signed last year that looks for an agreement on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions. There's a few papers that touch on how they're going to manage to coexist both of them. So this has created a lot of opposition to mining. If you can move to the next slide, because these reservations about the seabed have been expressed not only by environmental groups, and like the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition is one that agglomerates many of this opposition, but also by indigenous groups that fear that fishing will be affected, as well as marine bioprospecting industries. And even big industries like BMW, Volvo, Google, and Samsung have said they will not buy metals from the ocean floor. For mining in the area, there's been an increasing tide of opposition from countries calling for a moratorium in the area. Here, for example, this graphic created by that shows all the 24 countries that have said they don't want deep sea mining at the international level. And then at national level, we have countries that have instituted moratoriums on new exploration, like Namibia, several states in Australia, PNG just instituted a 10-year moratorium. Fiji and Vanuatu have issued a ban. And Canada, for example, have now a rigorous regulatory structure that eventually effectively is currently for now a ban. In Europe, if you move to the next slide, we have a bit of division. The European Parliament passed 2 resolutions in 2018 and 2021 calling for an international moratorium on deep sea mining, but so far only 7 countries, which include, for example, Spain, France, and Germany, have actually called for this. And Europe has a message in international waters, but then there's internal divisions. And because, for example, as we said before, we have Germany and Belgium that at the same time have as sponsoring contracts. So, for example, Spain started developing a lot of exploration through ICME, the Instituto Geológico Minero Español, in the Canary Islands, in the Mediterranean coast between Morocco and Spain, and in the coast of Galicia. But then in 2022, through a royal decree, enabled new criterions that basically have more or less stalled new deep sea mining. Portugal last year approved a draft bill for the moratorium until 2050. And as you can see in the map, there's other countries in the Mediterranean like Italy, Greece, and Malta, especially on hydrothermal mineralizations that are looking into exploration. But it seems like it's not advancing. The one that is more advanced, that is advancing the most, is Norway. It's now approved for deep sea mining, an area the size of Italy that evolves across its extended continental shelf and the territorial waters of the Svalbard archipelago. That they claim is the EEZ. However, Russia, UK, and several EU countries dispute Norway's ownership of these islands, EEZs. So this has been my introduction to deep sea mining. So now I'm going to go to the heart of the paper. That basically, if you pass to the next slide, basically, as we can see, despite this proliferation of interest in deep sea mining, there are two straightforward questions that are just taken for granted and not answered, but we believe are very relevant for the drafting of all these regulations and all this enactment of policy, which are what the seabed is, what it is, and who the stakeholders are. So I'm going to go to the first ones of these questions. If you move to the next slide, please. We could consider, so what is the seabed? No, we could consider the seabed as an extension of land. And then we could just use, for example, land mining regulations to regulate mining in the seabed. Or we could, for example, understand seabed as land, but that exists beneath the water, and acknowledge the soil under the water is different to the soil on land. And this is what maybe many oil and gas extraction companies have done, have developed regulations in that way. Or we could consider, for example, the seabed as an area of the ocean. And then if you just consider as an area of the ocean, then you have a lot more broader ecological impacts that you have to take into account. And then there's many ways. Another option is to consider the cultural and social aspects of the seabed and the sea, and therefore you have another way to define the seabed. So this also depends on the interest and disciplines you approach it from. If you're a giant scientist, or if you're a marine biologist, or if you're a policymaker from the UN or from a state country, if you're a coastal developer, a mineral developer, each of these perspectives, it's going to make you look at the seabed in a different way. So in the paper, we're not saying we're going to describe all of them. We're just saying that it's important to think about it, because the way you think about it, the disciplines you use, the knowledges you use, define how the regulations that govern is that developed. So to illustrate this, we go to 3 different countries. We show that the difference. No, these 4 questions that we have here are illustrated in 4 different examples through 4 different countries. Okay, so the first one, if you go to the next slide, is Papua New Guinea. It has been for several years the most advanced exploration project. The Saltwater 1, it was a sulfide deposit located 30 kilometers off the coast, and it was explored by the Nautilus Minerals company, headquartered in Canada. So this was for a long time the most advanced one, and everybody was talking about them. I don't know if you followed this, but then they had several economic downturns, technological difficulties. There was growing opposition from indigenous groups in the island and global opposition. So the company at the end went bankrupt in 2010. And however, the case is very interesting to us, because that despite the absence of regulations tailored for deep sea mining, PNG, Papua New Guinea, used modified conventional terrestrial mining legislations granting exploration license, environmental permit, and a mining lease without specific deep sea mining regulations. And what they did, if you go to the next slide, they modified the regulations to include the seabed underlying the territorial sea. That was it. They did a modification to the Mining Act of 1992. So this is an example of what happens when the seabed is considered an extension of land. No, you can just regulate it with terrestrial mining laws. Obviously, environmentalists and communities in PNG stressed that this framing was, led for a disregard of impacts on the seawater column, on the fishing stocks, and however, this what PNG did is what many other countries were doing, and Namibia, for example, did that. Japan at the moment is doing that, and several members of the European Union are just adapting existing regulations, mining regulations, to the seabed. They're not creating a new one, okay? This, for example, is the case of Norway, similar to that. If you go to the next slide. Norway, at the end of 2023, so very recently, approved through parliamentary majority plans to open up the deep sea mining despite great opposition. But Norway is incidentally also the EU's major oil producer, and so they understand the second of the questions I was pointing to you. They understand the seabed as different from land on air, but they see it as an exploitation of land. It's just that now it has a lot of water on top. So it's just more a technical difficulty. So as they did with when they developed oil and the oil regulations, they adapted land mining regulations. Now they're going to adapt all regulations to go to to do seabed mining. They use the existing offshore petroleum regulations to develop that 2019 Seabed Mineral Act. And to manage the seabed mining licenses, they're actually going to use the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate. So it's all managed with the same, as if it was oil, with the same structures. And obviously, this has several concerns. We're talking about different technology that's going to create different impacts. It's not the same to extract oil and to extract deep sea mining, especially if it's not nodules, if it's the ferromanganese crust or the hydrothermal vents that you actually have to crush it and take it out. Then there's a lot of concerns. I was reading about this. A lot of concerns from the Norwegians is that it's going so fast. In order to make it very quick, they're just adapting the regulations from oil mining, oil offshore petroleum regulations into deep sea mining to make it all move very fast. Okay, and then the next one is New Zealand. New Zealand represents the third example where the seabed is seen as part of the ocean, its water column and the ecosystem. They adopted these regulations in 2012 to specifically manage the EEZ and the continental shelf. So rather than taking land as a point of reference, they divided New Zealand's maritime space between the territorial sea, the exclusive economic zone, and the outer continental shelf. And the regulations specify that they might take into account the effects this may occur in the waters above and beyond the continental shelf. So this has had an important implication for the environmental regulations developed after and have played an important role in the rejection so far of 2 deep sea mining proposals off the coast of New Zealand. So this for us is a much more robust proposal, but it just highlights the difference between the other two. And then if you move to the next one, this is this will be, if you take into account how you understand deep sea mining, how you understand the seabed. What is the seabed? If you ask communities, if you ask indigenous groups. John Childs, who's a researcher from Lancaster University, did research on the Duke of York tribes in Papua New Guinea. It's an amazing paper. I recommend you to read it. And they discussed, identified, and designed research methods with the community, and they did sculpture, theater, drawings. And he asked what the seabed was to them. And they responded by describing a relational cosmology that includes the ocean as part of the earth, the people, the fish, the Masalai, the spirits. What they call is the ground. And in this quote, this local fisherman says that we should bring all these parts together, the fish, the people, and Masalai. We should show the government and the companies how Saltwater One is about grown. For them, you're affecting everything. With the Saltwater One, you're not only affecting the seabed, you're affecting the whole ground, the whole system. And one of these spirits, the Tamai dog, was described as the volcano god who defends the sea and is the protector of the seabed's treasures. This implied that by disrupting the volcanic activity through deep sea mining, because this was mine of hydrothermal vents, it was to incite a violent response of the spirits. So obviously this vision contrasts massively with the corporate vision of fixed riches, but also with more normal, or that will be more used to as notions of depth and division of the ocean in layers that scientists and lawyers use, because in reality for them, it's all part of one. So for them, it's not a space that it's empty. No, it's all interconnected and inhabited by spiritual beings. So what I want to argue is that who are the owners and who should be asked about whether to extract them is the next. So basically, at the moment, we've seen that there's different ways of seeing the seabed. Now, what is the seabed is one of them, but then you can also ask who are the owners, who should be asked about whether to extract them is actually the next question that we are going to address now. If you go to the next question, in the next slide. This is, according to the definition in marine spatial planning, a person, organization, or group with an interest on an influence on the marine environment, or whose influence directly or indirectly by activities and management decisions. This is the definition of a stakeholder. Currently, many states, as well as the ISA, are in the process of developing regulations for seabed exploration and exploitation. So it's paramount to ask who is identified and recognized as having a connection or interest, as well as who has access to drafting the regulations, as well as the level of meaningful participation in other aspects of policy development and governance. In marine spatial planning, stakeholder participation has been promoted and different methodologies has been proposed. For example, BERS proposes a questionnaire-based methodology. However, ultimately, what is very important is the way you actually develop those methodology. If you actually are interested in including all those marginalized stakeholders and their views and all the views and interests. So actually depends a lot on how the organization does it or the policy-making process that you put in place. And this is marine spatial planning. In deep sea mining, this is further complicated because who benefit or is affected is more difficult to define, because here you have the depth, you have the type of mining is different, the technology used is different, which has different implications, and this determines the impact it can have on humans, or it can have on local and global fisheries. And then another complication is that this changes whether it's in national waters or in the area. So again, we're going to go through different case studies, different countries, to see the different approaches and how important it is to ask this from early on and to include it in the regulations. First one is New Zealand. If you turn to the next slide. As I was saying, New Zealand, at least from what I've seen, has developed one of the most complete regulations, not only in terms of environmental protection, but also in terms of stakeholder involvement. For them, the stakeholders are the affected ministries, iwi authorities, customary marine title groups, etc. It's quite wide. And then they also developed a Maori Advisory Committee. But most importantly and crucial, I think, is that they allowed submissions supporting or opposing the marine project by anyone in New Zealand. So this led, and I'm going to explain a bit more in detail to this, to see how this is enacted. I'm going to explain this Trust Tasman application. That they were trying, this company was trying to mine iron sands 20 kilometers off the coast. The EPA received 4,680 submissions, mostly rejecting the project. I think there was only 2 or 3 in favor. And then this led to a very robust hearing process that took place in 2014, which resulted in the rejection of the application. Then the company submitted a new application, which was followed by a second round of submissions and hearings in 2017 that culminated in the approval of the project. But at this point, the EZ has another provision that if there's still opposition, there's another round of allows for another round of stakeholder involvements. So this eventually reached the High Court, and then the company, and the High Court stopped the project in 2018, and the company appealed, and then eventually in 2021, the Supreme Court rejected the project. So obviously, as we can see, the New Zealand case has quite a wide and robust way of introducing a lot of different voices. Then we have the Cook Island. If you go to the next slide, the Cook Island had the seabed minerals policy enacted in 2014 with support from this European EU-funded project, as I was telling you before. In this first regulation, they have a wide definition of who stakeholder was. The entire nation and its people are the community affected by seabed mining. However, when they were developing the policies, the seabed mining policies in 2019, the exploitation regulations, and they did major public consultations, but most of this, and there was a lot of submissions, but most of the concerns were not addressed. And the approved bill has only a short section on consultations and lacks detailed procedures or specific time periods. Instead of, putting this in place, they said, now people should be consulted through the Cook Island Seabed Minerals Authority Committee, which in theory represents the whole of the community, but has 7 members, and 4 of these members are already appointed by the minister. Not only that, the bill grants full authority to the minister responsible for seabed minerals to grant all exploration licenses. And if he wants, he can remove council members for public dissent. So this has raised a lot of concerns about lack of representation and transparency. So this is what happens. This was good on the onset at the start, but then once you developed and the regulations, all these stakeholder participation can be quickly dissolved or not taken into consideration. If you go to PNG, the next slide, you can see the Mining Act states that any person may object to the grant. And there's actually a process on how to do it. However, the problem in this case is that it's not enforced. So when Nautilus actually arrived there to develop mining, they were granted, the mining lease because the land regulations were modified. But for example, to get the environment license, the Environment Act require them to do a consultation of the person who were likely to be affected out of the activity. For Nautilus, they thought that the mining will never affect any of the community that was far away and quite deep, so they wouldn't affect the fishing or the communities. However, they wanted to address the tensions that were growing around the projects, so they did several. So they decided to do several presentations, trying to show how this wouldn't affect the communities. So what did they do? They did a stakeholder identification based on the closeness. No, they said, okay, this is the community closest to the project, and they also created a scheme of shared benefits. No, so so this is what happens. This example of what happens if there's no legal guidance. No, the company was ultimately in charge of defining who the stakeholder was, which communities to consult, and how. They did everything. The danger of leaving this to the company is that their objective is really to get a social license to operate, the same as land mining. They just want to stop conflicts, no? They avoid conflicts, as well, and comply with the regulations. They're not really after a meaningful decision-making process. Okay, the next slide, we have Japan. There's not a lot of information about Japan. There's also the language limitation, but I had a PhD student in Australia who was looking into this, and even there's not a lot of information. It's quite an hermetic and lack of transparent country. And despite pushing a lot for deep sea mining, the regulations are not quite advanced. Companies started already interested in deep sea mining in Japan in the 70s. And since 2014, the government has, through several projects, had huge investments and research and commercial projects, and aims to commercialize cobalt-rich crust by 2028, and especially recently the rare earth rich mats because they want to avoid dependence from China. They take it as a security and a national pride issue. So they have two major regulatory frameworks: the Mining Act, that was revised to adapt to deep sea mining, so very similar to PNG and Norway, and they have now the fourth basic plan on ocean policy. The most recent one is this one, which basically situates deep sea mining as a national security strategy. This is more about how we can use the ocean and develop regulations to extract as much as possible. There's nothing on stakeholder participation. There's not even mention. There's some mentioning of environmental regulations that will be taken into account, but nothing else. And this is one of the countries that I reckon will be probably the most advanced. These photos that you see here are old. This is 2014. So this is 10 years ago, and they've been investing a lot of money. Finally, I'm close to the end. Finally, the ISA, the next slide, the International Seabed Authority. I'm also looking into them because this is a very tricky one. The ISA is tasked with managing the seabed as the common heritage of mankind. So as they say in the regulations, activities in the area shall be carried out for the benefit of mankind as a whole, irrespective of the geographical location, whether coastal or landlocked. However, how do you represent humankind? No, there's no clear guidance provided by UNCLOS, quite in purpose. We can go on this if you want later on, but and the ISA has therefore to interpret what is this. There's been different ways in which they've tackled this. Obviously, member states are the stakeholders. You know, they have their vote in the assembly, but not all states have equal voice. In the central decision-making, the council, there are reserved seats for large consumers, major producers, as well as big investors, and also for special interests such as populous or economically disadvantaged states. So at the end, in the council, not all countries are represented. And then another way that the ISA has tried to advance is through the development of the communications and stakeholder engagement strategy. And they decided that ones who are to participate in this are the member states, the observers, contractors, so mining companies, and other entities. So this is quite a small circle of organizations. It's important to know that any organization can apply to be an observer there. I applied and they granted it through the Durham University when I was there. And so far they haven't rejected anyone. The thing is, as an observer, you are able to talk in the assembly, to give a speech, but your vote counts for nothing, because who takes most of the decisions are the council, but they just take advice from what the legal and technical commissions say. The LTC takes most decisions in the ISA. They accept or reject proposals. They're the ones developing the regulations for exploitation right now. And in the LTC, the members are applied by different countries. However, there was a lot of concern, especially I went there a few years ago, about the fact that there's a lot more geologists than environmental science appointees in this panel. So in order to incorporate more voices, the ISA has organized a lot of public consultations all over the world, north and south. But the problem is that there's no mechanism to include these discussions in the decision-making or in the drafting of the regulations, because all this is done by the LTC. Then another way to include the common heritage of mankind is the enterprise that was developed that had areas reserved for the benefit of developing countries, but this has not been developed at all. And there's a lot of concern that there's a lot of concern that business are dominating not only the ISA and the meetings, but also different countries. This is the case of Nauru. I don't know if you heard about this. Because several Pacific countries, like I was telling you, Cook Islands, Tonga, Kiribati, Nauru, have sponsored exploration contracts with companies, mostly to mine polymetallic nodules in the Pacific. One of these companies is called Deep Green Metals that sponsors Nauru. And in 2021, quite controversially, Nauru invoked what they call the 2-year rule. Apparently, this 2-year rule basically sets like a limit for the ISA to develop the regulations for exploitation. At the moment, this was last year. In 2023, the ISA in theory should have developed the regulations according to this rule, but there was a huge debate. And at the end, they didn't publish the regulations because there's huge concerns that basically the science is not there, it's not ready. What this shows, however, is that as well as in national jurisdiction as in the area, is that who counts as a stakeholder is interwoven with questions regarding how stakeholder participation is facilitated and how different social power among all these different stakeholders is accounted for. So because it's not just a matter of a broader inclusion of stakeholders, but it's about improving the mechanisms to enable their participation. And then the last slide, there's basically what we conclude is that there's a heavy reliance of fuzzy or incomplete regulations that have offered reduced accounts of who stakeholders are and what the seabed is. And this fuzziness has resulted in seabed policy that relies on many laws and codes from land that fail to appreciate the complexity of the underwater environment, as in the case of PNG and Norway, that they lack any clarity of who the stakeholder is, like in Japan, or they don't allow for participation, like in the Cook Islands, or on how these stakeholders can have any influence, like in the ISA. As we have seen, the seabed can be defined in various ways, depending on your expertise, your interest, your culture. So we advocate for an inclusion of all these different knowledges. There's no one recipe to identify all. Also, in terms of stakeholders, there's no one recipe. We could have a wide consideration of who the stakeholders are, like New Zealand or the ISA, or we could try and develop a method to include all stakeholders. But ultimately, as I was saying, is how that consultation and that participation is enacted. New Zealand, as we saw, had the mechanism to allow for this feedback, whilst the ISA doesn't have these mechanisms. What is clear is that given the range of impacts this can cause, stakeholders should involve a wide range of actors and spaces. Because who should be involved, who is not involved, and why? Who determines what voices are heard and which perspectives are silenced? These are the questions we should be asking when we see a space that is evolving so quickly. Because at the moment, deep sea mining is developing at a fast pace, and these questions have to be asked constantly, because also they change, and yeah, so we need to think about it. Basically, that's what we're saying. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marta. And gracias, Alberto. So I have questions. I think this paper is fascinating. This how you show that ontology of deep sea mining matters for policy, and I have a couple of questions regarding that. So basically, the paper, how hard was it to publish it in a policy journal, and how did you collaborate with your co-authors in terms of geographical expertise? It looks like you know a lot about the Pacific Islands, disciplinary expertise, things like that. But before posing those questions, I know that especially some of the people online need to leave soon, so I would suggest to open the floor for questions. I don't know if particularly at first for people online, because I know that a couple of you need to leave. Does somebody have a pressing question? Okay, if that's not the case, then Marta, could you please answer my set of questions, basically very kind of almost biographic, about how was it to publish in this journal? How was the collaboration between the authors in terms of geographical and disciplinary expertise? And what impact has the paper had so far? Thanks.
Okay. Well, in terms of publishing the paper, it was hard to publish it. We tried marine policy first, and we tried another paper, another journal, and then we were rejected twice, and then we was finally accepted in maritime studies. By then, the paper had gone through so many revisions that, yeah, it's. But I believe it was improved along the way. It included a lot before, for example, issues around precautionary principle, and that was taken away. There were other cases, including the case of Portugal. At the end, it was streamlined to kind of, show a bit more in depth, a bit more schematic, the different, what each case was bringing. Yeah, and even, I don't know, I feel that there's not so much interest on this, more on asking these bigger questions. Marine policy is publishing a lot on deep sea mining at the moment because it's advancing a lot, but they're more around more specific, more policy making, but they're not interested in merging deeper questions or ontological questions, policy making. You know, it's like and yeah, it hasn't. Yeah, I think it's useful in terms of asking the questions, but I think it's useful, but it hasn't. Yeah, it's not adopted. I don't know if you can think of ways to bring up these questions more. Let me know. And then on the co-authors, I started working with Phil on this because I went to Durham with a postdoc, and so we wanted to develop. We applied for an ESRC project that we were rejected, and this gave way to all what is happened to this research. Basically, all the cases on the Pacific is a lot because we had a lot of contacts with people that were involved in this EU project. They helped develop the regulations on all these Pacific countries, and therefore we had close contact with those people. We participated in workshops with them, and then this also was pushed forward even more with the cost action. That then we were, it was very good, the cost actions, because basically most of the researchers working in this space were joined together, and we were able to have wider discussions. There's a whole book published on this, on ocean governments. It's open source, and it was very easy, actually. It was very enriching experience.
Wonderful, thanks a lot. Effie.
Yes, thank you, Marta, for the talk. It was really, really interesting. And thanks for making us consider all these ontological questions about what exactly is the seabed, how is it defined, and how the stakeholders are defined. Because, like you say, we often take it for granted, inevitably. So my question relates to the kind of symbolic and cultural perceptions, mainly of the seabed, and to what extent have you found, based on your research, have you found that the symbolic and cultural perceptions, connotations of the seabed, especially in terms of places like the Pacific Islands, where the communities would have symbolically loaded connections to the seabed, I guess. To what extent do you think they feature prominently or less prominently in the actual governance and regulatory processes of deep sea mining? Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it depends a lot on, my feeling is that there's other people who probably respond this better than me, no? But this is my feeling, that the governance structures are dominated by few people. There's not the small countries, so the democratic structures are there, but they can be more dominated by a few people. So it really depends on who is governing at the time. I've had the feeling, for example, Vanuatu and Kiribati, I think have already banned deep sea mining. So they probably have a lot more connection, the governing structures have a lot more connections with these cultural perceptions. And for example, PNG, actually didn't tell you, but PNG, their ex-prime minister and the governor of the island where they were going to do mining had decided to include, this cosmology into the regulations, into the Mining Act. And he was trying to do that at he was coming from a regional level, but he was trying to make this amendment at the national level, especially after not to lose after Nautilus, and then also after Nautilus filed bankruptcy, they put in place a 10-year moratorium. So I think they jumped into it very quickly, but then there was a much more. It was such a rejection from the local community, and all this cultural awareness came into the floor. No, it was publicized more. And therefore, even the politicians were trying to use it to reject mining at least this quickly. No, I mean, PNG has been scarred with one of the worst mining projects in land. The worst mining environmental impacts, the worst cases are in Papua New Guinea. So the community are quite scarred by that. And yeah, I feel that. But then, for example, in the Cook Islands, it started that way, and then there's a lot of, apparently the head of the Cook Island at the moment is really in favor of this type, and the same as with Nauru, is really in favor of this type of development for its people. And so therefore they're ignoring a lot of the cultural concerns. So I think it really depends on who is in power and how it evolves. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jim.
That was weird.
No.
Right. Hello. Thanks for this paper. I really like the approach, the way you show how different ways to define the seabed lead to different kinds of regulations and different mechanisms for identifying, excluding stakeholders, and generally showing how this fuzziness on these matters is highly problematic. My question is about your own conceptual framework. I'm wondering what it is exactly that you pack into the term ontology. Apologies, I'm mostly an early modernist, and ontology in my world means something quite different. It refers to deeper layers of meaning, cosmology, like the kind of questions that is supposedly about the true nature of things. So just to get a bit of conceptual clarity for myself, do I get it right that you use the term ontology to, I don't know, to a set of concepts and categories that we use as definitions to construct legal frameworks? Is that what it means mostly?
Yeah. Here's where my colleagues Philip Steinberg and Kim Peters would be better to answer. They are the geographers, and they have the probably most appropriate to answer your question. I'm going to attempt, okay? I think that by answering, by using the word ontology is by trying to get to the deeper truth of what the seabed is, no? Like, I think they use it in that way. So what the seabed is. So this is an ontological question, no? And we're not saying we understand there's obviously many different perspectives, and that's what we're unpacking in the paper, but ultimately that's what we're trying to reach. We're trying to reach who truly is the seabed, and what are all the implications that should be considered, and what are the stakeholders. And probably could be everyone, no? But then how you enact that is a whole different thing. So I guess, which is pointing to the deeper, trying to point to the deeper question, no? Not living, it's not just a policy question, it's more like a deeper question of where we're going. I don't know if I'm answering. To be honest, I could have leave it without the ontology question myself, but Peter and Kim felt very strongly about it, so I was happy to leave it, to be honest.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's also the feeling that I got when reading it, that was not your your fault, let's say, but I think it's an interesting take anyway. So, Ada.
Hello, what's wrong? Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Really, really interesting. I have two questions. The first is a little bit more historical. I don't know if there's an answer to this, but I really appreciate the paper you use, or somebody used the term scramble for the seabed. And I was wondering if you think that a parallel could be drawn between UNCLOS and the Congress of Berlin, where like a scramble for Africa was institutionalized. And my second question, I don't know if it makes sense, but I'm brainstorming, so please bear with me. I understand how this attempt to conceptualize volume and depth has implications for the environment. What do you think the implication for sovereignty could be? Meaning, for example, if we consider the seabed an extension of land, then is it possible to have different layers of sovereignty? The water column is not what the stakeholders has control over, but it's just the seabed. So can you have different layers of sovereignty? Again, I don't know if this was clear, but that was the question.
But maybe it's that I don't know enough about the water column, but you mean the water column different from what? Like the sovereignty of the water column different to the sovereignty of the seabed, or what do you mean?
For example.
So if you could create different sovereignties.
Yes. So if like the mining company is only control over the seabed, but then you have local communities that see this in a more holistic way, and so they feel attached to what is above the seabed. Can you see that as a conflict of sovereignty as well, do you think?
Yeah, you could say like that. Yeah, certainly a conflict of interest. I mean, I have a very pragmatic point of view with this. The companies are there to extract minerals. They the cheapest way possible, and at the moment, this is a fight for regulations to see the companies want to enact them as fast as possible and with the less environmental regulation as possible to make it more economically viable, whilst the environmental groups and the indigenous groups and all the people who are involved in this are trying to slow them down. So, because at the end of the day, and this is what we're trying to show in the paper, and I think that the indigenous cosmology is showing very well. I mean, and you probably know more than me. I have the feeling that it's all extremely connected. So what you do in the seabed, even though it is really far away, it can have a lot of implications in a lot other layers. I mean, I don't know how many of you are involved in, more of these marine biology studies, but from what I've read, they're so intricately connected that you couldn't have different layers of jurisdiction like that. The mining companies will be super happy with that. Yeah, we just care about the bottom and we ignore what is on top. But at the end of the day, it's so connected, and it's becoming apparent with more research that's being carried out, more tests, and this thing of the plumes is extremely researched. There's one paper published about, they did a test here in the Mediterranean to see how much it could travel. I could share it with you, the plume. And that's where most of the interest lies at the moment. And I don't see, I don't see how different layers could work, you know. And then when you were talking about UNCLOS and the historical scramble for the seabed, yeah, in a way, UNCLOS created the framework to allow for this. Especially in the context, the thing is, I don't know how many of you are very familiar with UNCLOS. I'm not the expert. Again, if Phil Steinberg, that did his PhD, was here, he will be able to explain that better. But basically, the first idea of UNCLOS, especially in the area, was to the common heritage of mankind had a lot of regulations and a lot of mechanisms to enact that. The enterprise, a lot of help for all these landlocked countries to be able, you know, there were specific mechanisms that a percentage of any money that will be invested in exploited mining in the area will be then taken to exploit mining in those reserve areas and to help all these landlocked countries. So there was a lot of mechanisms to help all these countries, and that was stopped by some countries, especially apparently it was Germany, UK, and there was a few others who actually stopped all that. And then it was a lot, like it took a lot, the negotiation took a lot longer before it was published and closed, because they didn't agree with all of that. So, and then all of that was taken. So basically, all the good things that could have come from this common heritage of mankind were stripped out. And but at the same time, it's exactly what you say. It paved the way for deep sea mining. On the other hand, they were, for example, the US didn't sign UNCLOS. They developed their own regulations. Is that, you know, at the end of the day, provides a regulatory structure that then you have to deal with. The other option would have been that each country, like the USA did, provides their own regulations for the, you know, for the area, or you know, scramble for all. You know, it's like everybody could have created their own regulations and say, well, I think this could be done like this. At the end, any space that is managed in common, no, the theory of the commons, like Eleanor Ostrom actually shows us, you need to establish a lot of rules and regulations and agreements to decide how that is governed. The problem is who and how that is enacted. No, at the moment it's all enacted by the ISA, especially the Legal and Technical Commission, that is totally non-transparent. So, you know, we are not able to all form part of that decision making. Then again, it's not the same to manage a common plot of land, no, or a common building, than to manage the area with all states, no, being members or potential stakeholders. So, but yeah, I mean, thank you for making me think about it. I think initially I was thinking, yes, it opened the space for mining, but at the same time, if we didn't have that, it will have happened anyway, but without any regulations. At the moment, mining hasn't happened yet. Let's see where, and if this moratorium picks up, hopefully it can get stopped. Yeah. That's my take. Anyway.
Hello. Thanks a lot for the talk. Really informative, and I enjoyed it a lot. I wasn't able, however, to read the paper. Sorry for that. Not entirely anyway. So perhaps you address this question in the paper. I don't know, but I'm interested in knowing which ontology of the sea should the deep sea should we adopt? Like, we have this idea in mind. I don't know if you argue for it in the paper, but the more stakeholders, the more different types of stakeholders you include in the whatever project, the better, right? It's like course, there are problems with endless democracy, you know, inefficiency, or masking power differences of character, you know, genuine participation may not be possible, whatever. But more participation, better, right? Many more different kinds of people participating, better. But for the ontology, it seems that corporations and states even tend to proceed pragmatically, as you say, you know, they just want to avoid costs and time, so they accommodate their ontology to whatever it's most convenient for them to proceed, you know, so that can apply to any ontology, right? It doesn't matter. There's not a better ontology, so to speak, right?
Yeah. Yeah, in the paper we don't give you a solution, so you haven't missed it. They no, I mean, even now when I was preparing this presentation, I was thinking, and it's the same with land mining. Okay, it's the same thing. You want the more stakeholders, the better. But then you have all these problems of how you will do participation and how you make that efficient. So at the end, it's just a matter of the willingness. For me, I've been asked this question in land mining too. Is the willingness of who does the process to make it as most participative and as most democratic as possible. Fully democratic, fully participative, where all stakeholders' views are going to be taken into account is not possible. I mean, even in the ISA, each member state can participate, but each member state does not represent the views of all, you know, when Spain goes there, it doesn't represent the views of every person of Spain. So at the end, you just need a bit of, you know, you need to trust the representation system a bit more, and you could scale it down, and you could have, for example, in the case of Spain, you could have a consultation where people could provide their views, and you can try and make it as transparent, as open as possible in each context. And I think that trying to expose the different power struggles, try to limit the power of companies to influence these regulations. So I think it really depends on a case-by-case basis. That's why we don't propose specific recipes. In some cases, it might be better to do like in maritime spatial planning, you know, you can actually do a process where you identify the stakeholders. In some places, it could be useful. New Zealand does that. So you can identify them and then try and include them. In some others, you can have a wider approach and do a wider consultation. Ultimately is how open it is and how you include all those views in the enactment of the regulations and in the governance itself, you know, because once you have the regulations, you also have to carry on providing guidance and providing feedback and sorting out problems that might enact, you know, conflicts. So I think, yeah, I don't know if I answer your question.
I'd like to know whether, you know, same way that we have a clear normative criteria, you know, for determining what's better in terms of including stakeholders, you know, ideally, the more stakeholders you include and the more specific you are about how they are included and ensuring that all different kinds of stakeholders are represented. For example, you haven't mentioned any example including animals, which would be included through environmentalist organizations, representing them, whatever. But we have this clear normative criterion. But then what's the criterion for a better theoretical conceptualization of the deep sea? Do we have a criterion for that, or is this question parasitic on the question of stakeholders and whether they are included or not? Is this the only problematic question in normative terms?
So you're asking whether the seabed requires a different normative conceptualization about who the stakeholders are, as different to land, for example.
We can speak of a better conceptualization of the deep sea, there being a best one or one that is better or worse than the others, or is this question relative entirely to the question of justice? In your, I mean,
Marta,
yeah.
I think you already answered actually, which is according to the paper,
Sorry.
the holistic approach to the marine environment is more accurate than the definition of the seabed as land, for instance, right?
Sorry, I couldn't understand that question.
Sorry, no, I'm just suggesting because there seems to be a bit of a gap here. I'm just suggesting that I think that you already provided an answer, and kind of what the paper argues is that a holistic approach to the environment is more accurate, let's say, than defining the seabed as land, for instance. So I know that you claim in the paper that you are not providing solutions or answers, but you kind of say, well, it's more in accordance to the scientific view today to look at the marine environment, obviously not only as land, but as land connected to the column of water. I think that's what you were asking, right, Jose Carlos?
I just wasn't able to read the entire paper, so.
Okay, so I think that the answer is provided in the paper between the lines. When you say, well, we cannot take for granted that the seabed environment is separated for the column of water. We need to, as you were saying, this thing that you mentioned is super interesting to us, and I didn't know it. This very, very recent study of the circulation of the plume of sediment in the Western Mediterranean as a test of what would happen to sediment when you extract minerals from the seabed. So that's super interesting. I think that's and I think that comes a little bit to also what Ada and Jeep were asking, because yes, of course, how you defined the seabed affects not only the environment, but also sovereignty. And that's how the Truman Declaration started, yeah, by saying, well, the US territory is not only the land, it's also the submerged land, and the continental shelf would be redefined as submerged land, which, okay, it's a way of defining it, but it's a legal fiction after all. It's a legal construction, yeah, because actually we don't see, it's super far away from the coast, and you need technology to see it. So calling it land or submerged land is already a decision, let's say, right?
Totally.
I think, by the way, why the paper is so interesting, because it's reflective on those kinds of decisions, and it's telling policymakers, hey, you are making those kinds of decisions all the time, even though you don't problematize. So that's why I think the paper is interesting. That we need to look into definitions of the what, the who, because you are already doing it in different ways also, and we should all be able to reflect on it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's in fact what's happening. Yeah. The thing is, it depends so much on, we try to touch on that on the paper, but we don't do it a lot. It depends a lot on the expertise that is used, you know, whether you're a geologist or environmental scientist, and whether you're from a legal background, and especially policymakers, they just take for granted when to take these decisions, the implications they have for the future regulations. And to respond to the other question, indeed, I don't, the paper doesn't take a normative stand, but it does, it kind of evidences a bit, explaining that the New Zealand model, for me, sounds like the most robust way to go in terms of, you know, understanding the seabed as part of the ocean, and in terms of understanding specific, then they identify specific stakeholders who they send the application to, and then it's open to anyone to provide a submission, and they have several robust decision-making mechanisms to include all these different perspectives. That for me is quite exemplary. I'm actually really glad they have it, because otherwise we would be quite lost, because it doesn't happen anywhere else. So for me, if we want to look for an example in a normative way, would be look to New Zealand. The way they do it. Mind that New Zealand's now changed, as you know, they changed. We don't have Ardern again, so they have a new prime minister, and he's given signs of changing this a bit. I mean, the legislation is there, but recently there's been concerns that he's not on deep sea mining, but how was it? Oh yeah, something on marine fishing of the bottom trawling or something like that. He gave way for, there were a lot of regulations put in place to try and stop that, and he stopped that. So again, who is on top, who is managing, who is taking decisions has an influence a lot in this very fast evolving environment.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Héctor Isern, also from the Autonomous University in Barcelona, in the Institute of History of Science. I have a question, something that I don't know if you talk about it in the paper. I couldn't read the paper, but I was thinking about the technology itself, of the deep sea mining technology itself, and its rhetorical level, because and this is, I think, important because it is related with public perception questions, the way promoters of this technology, they need to sell this technology, and they need to sell it to the general public and policy regulators. So the question would be, how feasible is it? I mean, because I was thinking that one thing is to carry on a research and development project and just sending one single machine or one single artifact to the deep sea and extract some minerals or whatever. And a completely different thing is to carry on a routine-based exploitation operational system where there's a massive amount of machines dedicated to obtain some kind of economic value of this, right? I think that the technical feasibility of this technology, I think it's also on the table, maybe. And here I think that because of the rhetorical compound of this kind of technologies, which reminds me a little bit of geoengineering technologies, for instance, solar radiation management technologies or carbon capture technologies, I think that this is why I think that's why the ontological question that we've been discussing is so important. Because, for instance, do you think that there is a specific ontology of the seabed which suits better for the rhetorical element of these technologies? I mean, for instance, if we consider the seabed as part of the ocean, or if we consider the seabed of an extension of the land, do you think that this will make it easier to sell the technology as feasible to the general public or to the policymakers? I don't know if I'm being clear with this question, but yeah, this will be my question. Thank you.
I hadn't thought about it. What do you think?
I think that the ontology is quite important if we consider the rhetorical element. I mean, it depends on how you sell the technology, and it depends on how you present the deep sea as an extension of the land or only sea. I don't know, but. Yeah. But anyway, I was thinking if you could tell us more about the feasibility of the technology itself, or if it's just a magic thing that, someday we will be able to extract minerals from the deep sea.
I don't know enough, but I think it's quite complicated. It's not there. Nautilus went bankrupt because of that. It's such a massive investment. that basically they ran out of money to carry on with that. You know, you require a lot of investment, you know, all these high risk investors, they probably go in there, and I guess they eventually saw that the money, you know, that company wasn't going to make it, given because they were the first ones, and they were the ones that received the most opposition. Mind you, the people in Nautilus have moved to another company that has another name, and they are now mining not in PNG, but I think it's in another Pacific country, and they're not going for, they're focusing nodules at the moment. So they kind of say, no, we're different, no, but the end is the same. I think it's difficult. I find it extremely difficult that what they're trying to do, but and also because the applicability of this technology elsewhere, you know, it does. You're not gonna, I don't know. I mean, it's not like you can use, oh yeah, we can transfer this then to land mining. It's not like that. But yeah, I think it's possible. I have the feeling it's possible. Otherwise, I don't think this is a bubble. They're just trying to get money and then nothing. I think they're really trying to extract minerals. I think Japan is investing masses of money. Their companies, they're in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, are the ones that invest in the most. And they're putting pressure on the ISA to extract. So I mind you that last year, that 2-year period that Nauru gave has run out, and in theory, companies could have gone for it, and nobody has started. You know, that's what that 2-year rule was. Meaning, once the 2-year rule passed, in theory, companies could go there and start exploiting with other regulations because, hey, they didn't come in time. But nobody has done that. So I guess they're not ready. They're not ready. They're still, you know, they're still exploring. They're still testing the equipment. They're not. Nobody is in exploitation stage. Yeah.
Because
in terms of yeah.
I was also thinking that which doesn't maybe happen when we are talking about space technologies or atmosphere technologies. The deep sea is not the same in every country. I mean, I'm not an expert in oceanography, but I'm sure that the seabed it's completely different in the Mediterranean, for instance, than in the Japan coast, or at least more different than the atmosphere compound, which makes even more challenging the technological challenge.
I have my from what I've seen from photographs and the little I read is that they have a specific technology for nodules. Nodules are just balls sitting on the ocean. So they will use suckers to suck the nodules and take them through a vent up to the top. And then the fur and the crust that are on the seamounts and the sulfide that are on the hydrothermal vents, they need to crush them. So I imagine that you need specific technology for each one of them. In the, you know, that I can imagine the seamounts, you just need a machine that sits on top and crushes and takes it up. And the hydrothermal vents is a lot more unsettled terrain. So I think that's what determines more the technology, the type of mineral you're extracting. And you know, this is my guess. For example, in the Mediterranean, they have all mineralization of hydrothermal vents. I think is what there's the most in terms of minerals. So I imagine they can use a hydrothermal vent technology from Papua New Guinea and take it there. But that's just my guess. I have no idea, to be honest. Yeah.
Thank you. And I know I did that before and I shouldn't be doing this, but if I can contribute to the answer,
Yeah,
Ole Sparenberg was just here. He had to leave, and he has studied a little bit the history of ocean mining in general, and also Sam Robinson, who is still connected, but I think he's in an airport, so maybe that's why he's not with his camera on, has a paper on exactly what you were saying, Hector, the imaginaries, the technology imaginaries, or what Sheila Jasanoff has called the socio-technical imaginaries, exactly. So what kind of perceptions are behind, what kinds of perceptions of the feasibility of the technology are behind the regulations? Yes. And so some, and also a little bit Helen Rosabowski and actually Kimberly Peters, one of your co-authors, they have studied a little bit these push in the 1960s and 70s, this idea that this was going to happen very quickly, this idea of the scramble for the seabed as an urgency to create new regulation, which during the UNCLOS negotiations was already pushed down a little bit. So people were realizing, okay, this is not going to happen immediately. We have a little more time to think about how we are going to do this. It's also super interesting to see how the UNCLOS agreements are basically with manganese nodules in mind, and not with other minerals, which so manganese nodules, you can basically grab them from the surface of the deep sea, which of the seafloor, which is already a lot. I mean, it's not simple, and big companies are already doing that in Keplerton, in this area in the Pacific, for instance, but not at an economic scale. Yeah, but the regulations were with that in mind. Now there are other kinds of technologies which, as Marta was saying, may require new kinds of regulations. So it's super interesting to keep track of what is happening and how countries and companies and resistance movements are conceptualizing those new technologies. I find that very, very interesting. Yep. Are there any more questions here in the room or online? Yes, Ayman, please.
Just to thank you very much for the representation and also for the paper. Just for interaction and making relation between what you are seeing and our project in the Mediterranean Sea. Fortunately or unfortunately, we don't have area in the Mediterranean Sea, so we will not have any intervention from ESA in our regional sea. However, we will have 22 different national policies can be contributed to deep sea mining in the Mediterranean Sea. I see in your paper you pose questions, and it's easier always to pose questions, but the most difficult is to answer that question. So what is the model that you or we should follow or we should adapt to seabed mining? More question can be asked whether we stop deep sea mining and we come back to land mining, or we go to seabed mining with a new perception and with holistic environmental approach. As you know, marine spatial planning is one of the tools that working to solve these problems and solving the debate between conservation and economic development. However, marine spatial planning sometimes fail to reach these objectives because the conservation aspects is always shown as the main driver, not economical development. As you know, European Union now is promoting deep sea mining as one of the 5 sectors of the blue growth in European water, looking for new source of energy, for jobs, So my question is the third question. I will add another question for your question. What is the driver of the seabed mining in your point of view? Is it science? I mean, development of technologies? It is behind going to deep sea mining rather than land sea mining, or it is about policy drivers? I mean, it's a policy oriented to looking for new sources of energy for renewable sources like deep sea mining and looking for new jobs for humankind. Thank you.
Okay. There were three questions you're saying. I don't know where to start. Okay, you were talking about that there were 22 different national policies contributed to deep sea mining. So what model should we follow? I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, I think this is, I haven't thought of that. I think we should, you know, you probably know better than me. This is, yeah, I think that, you know, as a, you probably know better than me. I think going a bit to the other question, yeah. The thing is, you're asking me all these questions. I haven't thought of the Mediterranean. You probably know better than me based on what I've given you these ideas. You know, you have to think of who the stakeholders are, what is the seabed, and then come up with a plan. I don't know, could there be a plan for the Mediterranean where all the states came to an agreement, a conference where you kind of agree, if we're going to explode this, how we're going to do it? Is there, you probably know more than me, I wasn't aware, are there so many resources, mineral resources in the Mediterranean to do this, to justify this? You can answer me that. Are there that many mineral resources in the Mediterranean?
Yes, we do have some places that are potential resources for deep sea mining.
But all over the place?
I don't remember exactly, but it is promoted by Marine Spatial Planning Initiative, and one of the sectors that is regulated by Marine Spatial Planning.
Okay, because in that map that we had, I don't know how recent it is, it seemed to be some off the coast of Spain, Italy, and Greece. And yeah, so that it will be down to each country to put in place a regulation. So at the end, it will be a matter of what each country does. Or another option would be to try and put forward at EU level a sort of moratorium, something like that, same way that it's been done for at global level. That could be an initiative that could take place to understand really what the impacts will be for the whole of the Mediterranean before it happens, before it happens. But I think this is all down to the actors on the ground and how they interact and how they put in place different initiatives that could better govern this. You were also talking about marine spatial planning that can, that you were saying that it can fail to reach conservation and economic objectives, and that conservation sometimes put forward before economic development. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, my question, what is in your review, what is the driver, as our project is behind is going between environment and science, or between policy and science. So what do you think about the drivers behind deep sea mining? It is technological and technical advancement or policy oriented drivers?
I totally think it's policy oriented. I think there's a huge pressure all over the world. I study land mining too. There's huge pressure to extract mining all over the world for the energy transition. Batteries, connectors, solar and wind energy need lots of minerals. Before it was oil and gas, now it's mining. Mining, there's a push for mining all over the world. Conflicts are mounting. Sorry, I'm going to open the window because it's very hot here. Climate change. So there's a huge push all over the world to extract mining. I have no doubt about it that already deep sea mining was happening, and this is because of the interest of mining companies. I think capital tries to extract and make money as much as they can, and mining companies were already looking to the seabed to extract minerals. And I think now the energy transition is giving them the perfect excuse to push for mining in the deep sea. I don't know if it would have happened if it wasn't because of this. Maybe, but certainly this is giving the push that needed to put it forward. And actually, I have a bit of a normative stand on this. I have the feeling, the same way that there's a lot of push for lithium, nickel extraction in many countries on land. There's still push on the deep sea. I have the feeling that there's no, you know, for example, now that we're pushing towards mining, it's not like we're stopping to extract oil. We're still extracting oil. We live in a growth economy that just keeps growing the energy and material demand. Therefore, if you keep extracting, that just feeds a growing economy. And we're not gonna actually substitute oil with these minerals or substitute land mining with seabed mining. We're just gonna be add on top. We're gonna have oil, then land mining, and then deep sea mining. So because the cake just keeps growing. So my normative suggestion is that we need to start diminishing the demand of energy and material if we actually want to to extract what is needed, not just for the benefit of all the companies. We're just trying to extract at all costs. I don't think any Lockheed Martin, Nautilus had in mind, the energy, the material needs for the energy transition. That's the narrative. In reality, they just want to make money. This is what the companies are for. So it is down to the governments to understand what is really needed and to regulate where it can be extracted and how.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, Marta. I think it's interesting because IMEN has been working in marine policy and blue growth, for instance, and you're talking almost about blue degrowth now. So we open here a new set of debates and discussions. So I think it's a very good place to leave it. I love this connection between academic research and policy. I didn't mention this, but because when I said that Sam Robinson was in an airport, he's in Brussels right now to contribute as a historian to a commission at the European Commission to decide on whether deep sea mining, so the EU should be stopping deep sea mining or not. Ole Spangenberg, who also was in this meeting, is collaborating with Mats Ingolstadt, among other things, in a paper for a special issue that we are preparing. And Mats was very, very involved in the debates in Norway that led to this legislation of end of 2023 that you mentioned, that has been finally approved, that Norway will move forward with deep sea mining. I think Mats was involved in the public debate, basically sustaining the other view, but I don't want to speak on his behalf. So anyway, this connection between academic research that we are doing here and urgent policy questions, I find this fascinating, and I thank you for your paper and your contribution today with this talk to that reflection. So thanks a lot, Marta, and thanks to everyone.
Yeah, thank you for a very engaging debate.
See you soon.
See you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.